Now, I'm not either the first or the last person whose life has been touched by Jimmy Hill. So much has been said about him, it's hard to find anything new. I believe one of his great strengths was his timing. And he certainly timed it well on that Saturday morning, didn't he? Which is the reason we're all here. He passed from us on a day when football was about to be unfolded on every television channel, every radio station, every newspaper, and everyone led with a tribute to Jimmy Hill. And they went on for days, of course. I was privileged to do the first one on the BBC television shortly after Football Focus, and I was trying to think of something as I walked across the pitch at Southampton to say that summed him up that wouldn't take too long, and I came up with 3 words: innovator, inspiration, and inventor. I was quite proud of that. I could have added, actually, this alliteration had taken me over by now. I could have added iconic, incomparable, and irreplaceable. But the following day, listen, don't clap too loud. The following day I did the same thing on the radio, and then Martin O'Neill came on and said iconoclastic. My vocabulary looked very modest, to say the least, after that. But anyway, I'm here to talk about Jimmy Hill and television. 3 little stories that I think summed up the type of man he was. I always remember when sponsored shirts were first being suggested but were not permitted. Going to a match at Highfield Road, and David Dent, the secretary, took me on one side. He said, "Jimmy wants to see you in a private room." Now, Jimmy had always said to me, he didn't believe in boardrooms where people weren't allowed to go. He used to say, "We'll soon have a room where nobody goes." Well, this was it. This was the room where nobody went, because he was in there on his own. And he drew me in and he locked the door, and there lying on a table were 11 Coventry City shirts with the Talbot logo on the front. And he said to me, "Believe me," he said, that'll be made possible in a couple of years." Well, it wasn't a couple of years. He got it through quicker than that. But he'd thought of the sponsor's name on the front of shirts before anybody else had. I can never remember why those weren't sky blue, those shirts. I think it must have been Coventry's reserve kit that he was trying to keep people they could wear. But anyway, that was Jimmy for you. Inspiration, certainly he was as a co-commentator alongside me at the first cup final I ever did, 1977. Wonderful strength and support, because I was so nervous. Helped me with the winning goal, which at first I thought might be Lou Macari, but when I said, "Is it?" he nudged me and went green off. Of course he was right. I was right, he said to me. And do you know what? In those days, the BBC only had one replay machine, and we'll come on to Jimmy and replays in a minute. And it did show in the end that the ball had deflected off Jimmy Greenough. Now, of course, the commentators of today would have had 7 different angles of that, but we weren't so lucky in the 70s, as Barry Davis was the first to tell you, my colleague who's here today. Jimmy, chairman of 3 clubs. Not all at once, by the way. Coventry City, Fulham and Charlton. Inventor of 2 club songs, not just the Sky Blue song. Good old Arsenal, we're proud to sing that name, they sang, when they won the double in 1971. I wrote it, Jimmy said to me, and he did. Amazing. And of course you saw him, talking of Highbury, you saw him there when he came on as a linesman in the middle of a game when one of the officials was injured and they needed a replacement. They appealed to the stands, and he ran down in a tracksuit, picked up the flag and ran the line. Incredible. Now, inventor. The biggest contribution Jimmy made to television, in my view, was he was the first person to realise how much you could do in the way of interpretation by showing the action again. Because in the 70s, the so-called video replay was a new invention, and nobody had really mastered it. But Jimmy, with Brian Moore on the big match in London, and later at the BBC, he was the man. There weren't a panel of pundits every time then. He was the man that came on at the end of the game, and with the help of the replay machine, explained to you exactly what happened and its significance. Well, I worked with him a couple of times, which do come back to me very readily. He always wanted, Jimmy, to commentate when a goal was scored. And I always remember when I first got the job at the BBC, David Coleman said to me, when I first did live football this was, David Coleman said to me, "Don't give Jimmy the microphone while the ball's in play, you'll never get it back." And of course Jimmy was anxious all the time to get hold of the mic, and I was tugging it back, and he was determined to be actually talking when a goal was scored. And one night at Wembley, England versus Scotland, home international championships, I gave Jimmy the mic to speak during what I thought was a pause, and while he was talking, Trevor Francis whacked the ball in the Scottish net. And I thought, my God, that's it now. I've done myself a disservice, and at last he's got his wish. He's commentated on a goal. Thankfully, the flag went up for offside. Sometimes when Jimmy was presenting the show, he would come with the commentator to the game in the afternoon. And we were scheduled once to go to Everton on a very, very blustery day. And in those days, the BBC had a lot more money than it's got now. And we hired, or somebody hired, a 4-seater plane to take Jimmy Hill and myself to the match on Merseyside. And we had a very bumpy ride on the way up. The plane was going up and down and jerking about as we went over the Mersey, and Jimmy and I both felt decidedly shaky when we got off the plane. He said, "Don't worry," he said, "let's go and have a couple of port and lemons," which we did in some bar at John Lennon Airport, as it would be known now. Then we took the car to Goodison Park, did the match, came back. The journey back was much more comfortable. Now, this match happened at a time when Britain was under a 3-day week, and you were limited to how much petrol you were allowed to put in your car. So it's a sensitive time. Jimmy walked into the studio that evening and he said to the editor, "I've got my starting words." And the editor said, "What are?" He said, "Okay, oh, no, leave it with me." So I've got a great start. So they came on with the music, just like you heard there. Went to Jimmy, he went, "Good evening, welcome to Match of the Day. My tummy's not too good. I've been bumping about in a 4-seater plane all afternoon." Well, of course, the duty office was besieged with calls. Motorists who weren't allowed more than 3 gallons of petrol in their car, and the BBC had hired a plane to take Jimmy Hill to Everton. Jimmy just laughed it off, didn't he? Same way when I once went to a match with him at Tottenham, and you were talking earlier on about the chants that used to follow him around, as it were. And in the early days, this was more on London weekend. Greg Dyke would remember the London games at Tottenham that Brian Moore used to commentate on. And the fans at one end at Tottenham had this chant, which was actually copied by many other teams. "If you hate Jimmy Hill, clap your hands. We are the Jimmy Hill haters." All in good part, of course. And they were chanting this in Tottenham while I was actually commentating with Jimmy. He looked at me and said, "That's recognition for you." Jimmy had all sorts of little homilies that I learned from. One of them was, always make a plus out of a minus. There's some real truth in that, but it's difficult to do when somebody that you've cherished passes away. So here's a final thought. Jimmy spanned 60 years and more in football. Possibly the highlight of English football in the period that he was with us was winning the World Cup in 1966 under the captaincy of Bobby Moore. Now, I'm afraid they don't award honours posthumously. If they did, I think we might now be talking, I know we would, about Sir Bobby Moore. And I'll leave you with this. If I may, I'll leave you here in Coventry with this thought. We may also have been talking about Sir Jimmy Hill.